of anthropology, I want to emphasize that here I'm addressing or I'm presenting on social anthropology. Anthropology started from the assumption that they do not live like us. These were Europeans looking at other communities outside Europe. And hence the need to understand the differences and honestly revisit the moral systems if we are to understand the logic that shaped and continue to shape the need to understand social-cultural, linguistic, economic, political, and other patterns of transformation for many societies, and especially when there are roles of external agents involved. So I trace the peaks and troughs of social anthropology at Makerere from three periods: the 1939 to 1971, 1972 to 96, and then from 1996 to date. Now, the period of 1939 to 1971 was strongly embedded in the colonial context. Even the teaching of social anthropology at Makerere, which started in 1939, was at the time housed in the Department of Social Studies, which was multidimensional, in the Faculty of Arts. And it started at the time when there was a rise in British colonial education and administrative policies. And as a result of this, they established the East African Institute of Social Research, which was to be dominated by social anthropologists. This later became the Makerere Institute of Social Research currently. At this time, teaching and researching in social anthropology was very active with the strong influence of the race theories. The British used these race theories to shape and implement the research agenda that aimed at understanding the political organization of colonial societies to strengthen their colonial political administration of indirect rule. And then this research agenda was financed directly from the colonial office in London. The British and other colonialists believed that Europeans were the most civilized and hence justified their colonial rule to transform the non-European cultures, because they believed that these cultures were irrational in terms of their values and practices, and hence required transformation. For this transformation to take place, it was important for the Europeans to live with Africans in order to intimately understand their cultures through ethnographic studies. Some anthropological researchers even married the African research assistants and respondents to this effect. The French, of course, used the race theory to strengthen their colonial assimilation policy. So the teaching of social anthropology at Makerere University came against that background and used the literature from studies that had already been carried out in other political colonies. The first British social anthropologists focused intensely on the understanding of social structure organization of societies. For example, Radcliffe Brown focused on kinship and family. Malinowski focused on the system of exchange using the shared jewelry. Moss wrote on the gift in order to explain exchange and reciprocity across different aspects of social life. And the other areas of research, of course, included religion, spirit possession, witchcraft, death and burial rituals, among others. And the key anthropologists then included Dr. Audrey Richards, Isabel Richards, L.A. Fallers, Peter Gatkin, Peter Rigby, and Aidan Southall. So in this phase, the African political activists fighting for political independence and some academics like Okot Pibitek, Tibamanya Mwene Mushanga, and Bagamuhunda in Uganda, as well as Achima Fegi in South Africa, are choosing social anthropology scholars of using the discipline to aid the colonialists. And in the eyes, whereas in the eyes of the colonized, it was being misused, in the eyes of the colonial administration, the purpose of the discipline was being achieved and hence not being misused. The era of 1972 to 96, of course, was ushered in by the expulsion of Asians by President Idi Amin in 1972, and he accused them of exploiting Ugandans because at that time, 90% of the businesses were Asian, and most of the 90% of Ugandan revenue was also from Indians. Even at Makerere, staffing was over 95% expatriate. So when the expatriates were expelled along with the Asians, Makerere suffered greatly, and young African or Ugandan academics, most of whom had not trained at higher graduate levels, started to head units. Professor Chibuka, in this case, was among the first heads of department, heading two departments, Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology, following the departure. He's the one who recruited other scholars like Professor Wabukwari and Tarsis Kabwejere. The point that must be noted here is that President Idi Amin did not order the scrapping of social anthropology, but the departure of the expatriate social anthropologists dramatically reduced teaching and research capacity. And in this era, we may say that anthropology was not misused because it was largely not used. So from 1996 to date, it is a period characterized by the humanities and social sciences trying to stay afloat amidst limited government funding, and of course also the economic liberalization policies that saw the removal of government funding, social services like health and education, and introduced cost sharing. It is also a time when most anthropologists in Uganda and Africa learned from other African anthropologists through academic exchanges. And these anthropologists and critical thinkers include Mafeje, Christine Obo, Mwenda Ntaragwi, Dani Nabudede, Peter Nyong, and Mahamud Mahmudan, who critiqued the original methodological foundations and the theoretical frameworks of anthropology in order to study Africa in the interest of Africa. So publications like Mawazo, which has been launched in the morning, had started and was an outlet of such ideas. At Makerere, whereas the social anthropology was in the Department of Social Anthropology, the Institute of Social Languages needed to teach their students learning local languages a bit of social anthropology, and hence started. It was between 96 and 2010 that through several meetings, the subject of social anthropology was able to be returned to Department of Sociology to become Department of Sociology and Anthropology once again. So during this time, there was a significant shift in theoretical orientation from the British and French anthropology to Nordic and Scandinavian anthropology, which was based on the principle of Nordic humanism. Norway in particular introduced funding of South-North collaborations that helped train local anthropologists and established, of course, research partnerships, and this rejuvenated and raised the face of anthropology again. The Drylands project in mid-1990s and Norhead project in 2015 raised the new face of social anthropology. And one of the studies which investigated informal cross-border trade on Busia, Uganda-Kenya border developed a policy paper which was presented to the African Union and later adopted to mainstream African regional trade. Similar successes have been cited in food and nutrition security, managing of pandemics and epidemics, reproductive health, maternal child health, as well as resolution of conflicts, including protection of minority populations. Hence, if this trend continues, even in the eyes of non-European societies, social anthropology will not be seen as misused or misunderstood. In conclusion, therefore, The scholarly value of social anthropology is not disputed. It remains a critical, important, and powerful discipline. However, the value of the discipline depends on the user and the purpose for which it is put. The three historical periods show the peak between 1939 to 1971, a trough between 1972 and 96, and the rising again from 1990s to date. The primary role of the ivory tower of the universities is to promote this rise, to reorient its intent, or the social anthropological intent and purpose, to reawaken the true identity of the citizenry among the originally called subject communities. If anthropological teaching and research remains focused on helping the global power brokers or ruling classes to develop and spread ideologies that suppress local people's voices, values, and visions, then this may be defined as the abuse of the discipline and against the aspirations of the citizenry, hence being perceived as misused or misunderstood. I thank you. That ends my presentation.
Thank you, Professor Techereza, for that presentation. You've actually spared us 1 minute, which is good. Now we go to the last presentation, and the last presentation is by Professor Josephine Aichire, together with Dr. Anna Nisima, and the presentation is about resilience amidst turbulent waters, humanities at Makerere in the era of neoliberal orthodoxy. I'm looking forward to listening to this neoliberal orthodoxy. I hope I'm not part of the neoliberal orthodoxy myself, but I leave the stage to Professor Josephine Aichire and a colleague to make the presentation. Thank you. Josephine Aichire. Tech team, are we sure that Josephine Aichire is still on? Professor Techereza, you can mute. Professor Aichire.
She's muted.
Tech team, Godfrey, please, can you do something?
Call her.
If she's muted, the technical team can unmute. They have the power to unmute.
Now, oh, okay.
Godfrey Mayende, please, could you do something?
Yes, I am actually doing something. And in front of me here is I have just picked her up because there was a technical problem. We use this. Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you. And you may want to put Peter in was his spot later.
We were about to send an e-ambulance.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about this. I was online until it was time for my presentation, and then my computer hung. But fortunately, I was in the vicinity. Thank you very much, Chair. My presentation is about resilience amidst turbulent waters, humanities at Makerere University in the era of neoliberal orthodoxy. And our argument here is that the Makerere University, the Humanities, has been part of that history of Makerere University, has been core in terms of defining the image of Makerere University. However, there is a turbulence around the validation, for example, of science, technology, and mathematics, STEM, and the fact that by the very nature of humanities, it has been a critical casualty of neoliberalism. And why do we think that neoliberalism needs to be understood? Why do we say that neoliberalism has affected higher education, but specifically the humanities? So neoliberalism is conceptualized as a dominant worldview of market-driven trajectories propagated as a single story. And the key words here are that the single story and the crowding out of other narratives, of other conceptualization, of creating a world without competing narratives is something that creates a pervasive assault, presenting a prism refracting the so-called rational angle to every aspect of things. The rational angle only understood in economic sense, in material aspects, and in quantitative aspects. Therefore, validating positivism that had even lost its credentials. So this pervasive assault is what we are talking about. And then we want to see what is it that explains the rather paradoxical tenacity of the humanities at Makerere University. So there are huge fractures, but there are also spaces of resilience. And we took the inside actor view of the situation. So there are broader discussions around neoliberalism. Scholars around the world, around the continent, have talked about neoliberalism and its impact on higher education. Mamdani, among others, has written about neoliberalism at Makerere University. Sishaman has written, Rujirire Runaku has written. All these are scholars, Chiza, Asimwe. We have a range of scholarship around neoliberalism. But what this angle is bringing, what we bring to the table with this research is the resilience aspect of humanities at Makerere University, as well as looking at the actor voices, inside actors, the lecturers and the students in the college. So this is not something about a research talking about other people. It is actually a research talking about us. How have we maintained resilience amidst these waters of neoliberal authority? So this study tried to get all these actor voices. And of course, in methodological terms, there are issues about objectivity and the fragmentations around studying the self. But we say that the space of studying the self is also a valid kind of venture as an academic scholarship aspect. So how do we describe the turbulence at Makerere University? Of course, Makerere is not unique or even independent from the global ecosystem, but there's a unique story to tell around the specific turbulence. Of course, one is the revalidation of positivism and the general preference for science. So the turn to STEM we know very well. Many people have talked about it. And what has happened is that the underlying reification of STEM is layered within the neoliberal orthodoxy and has structured the world and its people in a unified and simplistic single story. This is what we are emphasizing, that kind of unilateral construction of reality as a single story, and that which is supposed to be seen through the prism of natural sciences. And neoliberalism then as a mode of regulation, as a form of governmentality, it succeeds in corporatizing higher education. It becomes a corporate, it becomes a market, as Dan talked about it. And it becomes therefore an arena for transaction, as opposed to an arena for scholarship and innovation and for answering societal needs. The other aspect about the humanities is the fact that when the fee paying, when the privatization came along, humanities came off as a concentration camp of fee paying students. And that meant that whereas there could be a sort of core preservation of what constitutes the natural sciences, we have an assault on humanities as you have all these fee-paying students, big numbers, and yet not facilitated in terms of space, in terms of human resource. And we are told, for example, by 2002, the Faculty of Arts then was home to over 20,000 students, and yet that expansion was not the same in the natural sciences. And that concentration camp, then you find that people would say, we are studying by rumors, we are in a political rally, and that of course impacts on the quality of the teaching and learning of humanities, especially in terms of methodic trajectories. And that then also undermines even what we call humanities in a sense. The other aspect, of course, is about restructuring, where courses that were initially brought on the basis that the market, they are responsive to the market. Over time, then the same courses are transferred, the same courses are deleted, the same course. So there's always this kind of volatile situation, which doesn't allow the harmonization of effort. And the other turbulence is about the fact that when government introduced the science policy 75, most of the government-sponsored students were then given to science courses. So whereas before 2005, you had 30%, almost 30% of government admissions, government-sponsored as humanities. In the current situation, we have less than 10%. I'm not able to share the screen for today, but I have figures that show, for example, that as of now, we have 9.6%. And that only comes through the district quota, not the national merit. What does this say? What we always talk about is actually what we are talking about when we talk about government sponsorship and STEM and so on. This is a drop in the ocean. You have over 3,000 schools, and you have in the country, and the intake for government sponsorship is 2,000. So in effect, you have less than one student per school. But the fact that it exists It makes people anxious. It makes students anxious. People in the schools, students in the high schools are anxious. If they don't take sciences, they feel rejected. That is something that creates a whole sort of negativity around humanities. Even when we talk about the different universities now, you go to Kavale, you go to UCU, you go to Muni, even the private universities, the core humanities, the core social sciences is not marketable. So what is marketable are these so-called, those that are responding to the market. And yet the market is still also volatile. The other aspect is about the transactional aspect that comes with responding to adversity. So what do actors do? The actors within humanity, one, they respond by what we call professionalization of courses. And that is also something that the keynote speakers have talked about in terms of removing the actual content of humanity in the name of professionalization. The other aspect is about transaction and consultancy, making the intellectual as a merchant in the market. We know that this is a survival mechanism. People jump from one field to the other, and they are not able to build competencies within core humanities and social sciences. That transaction means that people only respond to what the consultancies talk about, or what the ministries and the NGOs want them to say. And actually then the students, when we had conversations with the students, they said, we don't understand. They say humanities are not marketable. And yet we see government commissioning our lecturers to go away in the field for a long time. And that means they concentrate on those and we do not get attention. So you see a paradox that actually in the consultancy world, humanities is thriving. People are doing consultancy and they are jumping from this to that. And there is all this competition as scholars really in the marketplace. And the students then also become transactional. We see students doing coursework in the consultancy firms. We asked, for example, students, a number of students, which books inspire you? And I said, which books? For us, we read handouts, we read the photocopied notes. Which books are you talking about? Only a few from history, some from political science could name books in their field. And for us, that's an indication that we really need to retrieve and rebuild a social science and humanities thing. And this also we see in graduate studies that you tend to be in a box. We've received responses from external examiners that tell us that, is this guideline for an NGO report or a PhD thesis? Because if it is for a PhD thesis, it doesn't apply to building an academic. But finally, the voices from our lecturers and students say, yes, humanities is going through a turbulence, but actually there is a soul that is left. And that soul is what keeps it going. That's what keeps people going and impacting on the different processes. So you see pockets of success in the different disciplines. You see, for example, courses in philosophy, literature that originally were said to be non-marketable are beginning to regain their glory, and somehow that resilience is what the current academic leadership, the humanities, should focus on. By way of conclusion, we are saying that the pervasive neoliberal logic has undermined the epistemological and ideological premises of the tradition of humanities. However, in this very inherent cracks, we see that the humanities are still reclaiming the position and are able to redefine the kind of space that should apply, especially when we talk about humanities in an African academy, because we are also talking about the need and the responsibility to actually decolonize the academy. So the voices from the several insider actors and in the narratives emphasize the need to recenter humanities towards theorization of real issues that affect reality, issues around indigenous knowledge, issues around the fact that we actually need to refashion what the knowledge that we are creating so that we are able to respond to the current situation, but also undercut the pervasive orthodoxy of neoliberalism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ichiri, for that insightful presentation. I hope the members present have got some ideas and they will pose questions. In a way of starting off, we have about 20 minutes, and we'll do it very quickly. I'll have my questions here, which I've had, and possibly also highlight the questions by the panelists, by the members of the public, and then you'll have a few minutes to respond at the end, and we'll make it very quickly. One, we're starting off with Julius Chikuma's presentation. You talk only of the present, and I thought that you'll have talked about when, where, and what happened. In other words, the title of your paper says Trends and Patterns. Tell us, when was psychology established? We are saying 100 years, in the past 100 years, possibly less. But when was it established? What happened? Where? Who were the key drivers? And I want to pick out the questions by Emma, with the key personalities possibly. And then also Amon asked about the question of ping pong. Is a humanities agency? What is this humanities agency? Is it the humanities agency that is causing that or not? So some of those are key issues that possibly, but the most important will have been the these trends and patterns. We didn't see them. I will skip Grace first. I go to Peter, and then come back to Grace. Grace make a Peter made a presentation of misused or misunderstood, tracing the peaks and troughs of social anthropology. And the key questions I kind of came up with that you might need to reflect or maybe talk about is whether anthropology is still representing other interests like it did. You mentioned in the colonial interests, then the trough, and then now the reemergence. But in the reemergence, you talk about the NORAD sponsorship and directing the training of anthropologists. So is social anthropology or anthropology in general still representing other interests? And if so, if not, where is the Ugandan anthropology? What is the focus now? Are there initiatives or focus or interest? Or it is still an appendage of the foreign interests? Maybe also you want to talk about some of the examples of those who were expelled. I know most the academics, apart from those who had of Asian origin, many of them were not expelled, but they left voluntarily given the political instability. So maybe you can enlighten us about the anthropology. Grace mentioned the evolution of women and gender studies and the shift in research, and now talking about rights, identity and politics, and also mentioned that there is a challenge of under-theorization. only wanted to hear from Grace, what is this theory that informs the present day study, women and gender studies? Is there a particular one that is Ugandan or East African, or something that is unique that the discipline is bringing to the table? Why is this shift? Is it still also external driven, or there is a particular brand of the Ugandan gender and women studies? And of course, I want to echo Amon's question from the public asking, what is the name? Can you tell us about this politics of naming women studies, women and gender studies? Possibly maybe something else coming. Why is the department not called feminist studies? You know, since being gender and women studies being more interdisciplinary. So possibly could enlighten the public on that. Finally, Professor Hichire had an exciting presentation on humanities and how they are in the turbulent waters. The key question that wanted Josephine to highlight. Why are there only turbulences, Josephine? And there are times when the humanities were in success, and therefore we could highlight those successes when we are in glory. And there are times when we are celebrating, and could we get to hear about those times when we are not in turbulent waters? And also, of course, are there times when humanities at mark, when everything was okay, and therefore would say we are celebrating? Two, this marketability, and you had in the first presentation in psychology, Julius Kikoma talking about the courses in psychology, the two courses which are marketable in quotes. Could this be an extension of the neoliberal orthodoxy we are talking about, or something else? And finally, of course, you mentioned about the course content, and I like the idea of professionalization and merchants in the market or transactional kind of disciplines. And I wanted to just ask whether this content was also changed, but if you have answered it, it's fine. So let me check if there are other questions from the public. Please raise up your hand, and if you are in the public, so that we can be picking you, and keep the questions as brief as you can. The panelists will respond at the end. Meanwhile, we can start with a few of those responses, starting with Julius.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, the public, for sending those questions and asking for clarifications through. I began by speaking about this question of the emergence and growth of the discipline, and I should have made reference to the fact that the first setup, structural setup of the discipline of psychology was in the 50s as a department in social sciences, and then there was a psychologist, but who was not actually Ugandan, that headed it from Nigeria, Jai. But he had a background in educational psychology, and of course, eventually, he would want to move the department to the School of Education, where when it went to the School of Education, of course, some of the key personalities that took over when Jai left was Professor Jethro Uplot, who actually was in a very big personality in the School of Education for quite a long time. And Professor Uplot really remained one of those big names in the discipline for quite a while, even when other later generations came on and extended the application of psychology beyond education. Other people that came in, which are big persons, are big names that we need to note here, and I've noted in the chat as well. I actually responded to some of those questions in the chat. I mentioned Professor. Actually, even when you read Professor Sebufu's book, he actually really credits the efforts to move the discipline of psychology or the Department of Psychology to an institute. Credits it to Professor Mnene. But Professor Mnene is an applied psychologist, focusing on organizational human resource. And no wonder during the time when he really pushed for the establishment of an institute, he focused on making sure that the programs that are designed to fit in the institute were applied. So that gave rise to, gave birth to, areas of specialization like counseling psychology, organizational psychology at masters, clinical psychology, and also, of course, educational psychology, even though educational psychology had been around. But the point I've also made around this question is that this development, of course, had a knock-on effect in terms of not giving enough space to grow the people who focus on the basic and the general areas. There, you also alluded to a question by one of the people in the public. That is, I think, Amon Moine talking about the ping pong that I mentioned.
Yes, you may need to make it quick because we are.
You didn't tell me how many minutes.
You had only two.
I thought I was enjoying your charity.
No.
Okay.
Okay, make it quick and then we move on, please.
No problem. So anyhow, so the ping pong was mainly at the height of, this privatization of programs in the university. So of course, given that psychology was mounting programs that were seen as marketable, it attracted a lot of fee-paying people, students. So therefore, each of the sites wanted the programs in their place. But now that we are in a different era, money is no longer the basis of fighting across disciplines. I think that now there is hope for opportunity for new interdisciplinary formations. Chair, I will stop it at that.
Thank you very much, Julius. Could we go to Professor Techireza, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. You raised two comments. One was on whether right now the rise or the emerging social anthropology focus, and especially the funding from the Nordic countries, could be representing other interests or even other. But when you read about the criteria for joining the EU and the aspirations of the AEU, to which the Nordic countries are also part, it is to be influential in global politics and economics. And part of their budgets, which are made to the pool, is actually to contribute towards this. And each country is supposed to have some funds going to the south to promote this dominance. So in a way, it may be there, but silent. But in the activities they do, it could be matching, although they are not saying it directly. Secondly, some of the examples of the expatriates who expelled, although some had already left, at least there is Aidan Southall, Peter Rigby, I think Peter Gatkos, the rest had left earlier because their term of being here had expired, and that is Audrey Richards. Thank you.
All right, but you haven't answered what is the Ugandan anthropology we're having, or East African anthropology. Do you have a word, or you are going to consider the question?
Let me ponder over the question.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't have yet Grace back, but we can have Professor Hichire. There were issues, especially in terms of this marketability, the turbulences, and then whether they are new. I mean, when humanities was not in the turbulence in the middle of the storm.
Thank you, Chair. You know that gospel about the servant who knew his boss very well and said, I knew you would cut me off, so I kept the talent. So our chair is very efficient. I knew if I went into the history, I would not be able to explain the turbulence. So in fact, the first part of the paper is about the fact that Makerere, Humanities at Makerere was consolidated in the 1940s, the post-war era, and it is what really made Makerere at the time with debates and so on. We have a whole range of scholars and the actors, Milton Obote, Julius Nyerere, then the scholars. We have all that history and the vibrancy of the 1960s up to the 1970s to the war. So, okay. So in a sense, the glory you're talking about has been there and it is still alive. I think you're very right in terms of saying that we need to sort of refashion how we look at that glory and how it still permeates the scholarship as of now. So in a sense, the turbulence that we are talking about is the current from the 1980s. And the fact that, you know, when you have turbulences, that's why we thought about the fact that if all this that has happened to the humanities in Makerere was to happen maybe to another discipline, it would have disappeared. So that's how we bring in the issue of resilience, and resilience in a sense that despite these turbulences, you have the soul that still exists. I think the marketability issue has been commented on. It is something that we need to debunk because, as we have said, the university should provide leadership society and to ensure that it has that role of defining, of being part of what defines the common good. I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Chair.
Oh, thank you very much, Grace. Josephine, we have 5 minutes. I hope I might use them usefully. Just to reflect on presenters, and this yesterday's keynote address was about the humanities in the era of COVID. And I know this is the wrong place to deal with, but the humanities and the social sciences, scientists have not been present in the COVID era. And so this is something that we may want to maybe think about, or maybe they are in the other panels, because we are being directed by scientists, and you know, science, the problem with that as well. But thank you very much, members. We had 4 papers. I hope Grace is not yet back. She indicated she had,
did you retreat from your suggestion?
Yeah, I'm coming, Julius. So Josephine had presented how humanities is in the turbulent waters and the implication of that turbulence, and that humanities in all the turbulent waters is a casualty in that case. And of course, Grace's paper was looking at the trajectory of women and gender studies at Makerere University, beginning at the birth when Makerere University was 70 years old. And then the movement, the shift in terms of research, I think the beginning part was academic, but also advocacy. And then it shifts the research agenda to focus more on the rights, identity, and politics. And then, of course, there is that problem of under-theorization of what we call women and gender studies. And Julius, of course, traces the teaching of psychology at Makerere and and then the contestation between the School of Education and the Faculty of Social Sciences, and of course, as well, science. And Julius, you remember, you should also find out about the occupants of room 1 in the School of Social Sciences, because that's where social psychology was housed. So you might want to add that part of it. And finally, Peter.
I know, but you gave away the computer lab. You gave away the room when we wanted to come.
Peter Techireza looked at the anthropology right from the colonial times, the thrives and the peaks, then the post-colonial time when anthropology was bashed and considered to be the agent of colonialism, and of course the new rebirth. But as you have seen from the comments, even the new rebirth, it appears that we are still under the control of some foreign objects. We look forward for having a unique Ugandan, East African or African anthropology. And with those few words, members, would like to say that it has been a pleasure having you around, and that the technical team are already ping-ponging that we have time. And I would like to say thank you, unless the tech have something. Mayende, if you have something to say, or the principal, you have something to say. From my side, I'll say cheers. Colleagues, you are free to exit at your will. The session has ended with 1 minute to spare.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. Bye-bye.